the city. We know that in North Minneapolis, many of those families have never had the police come to their aid when they need it in due time. Why? Because punishing people of color who historically have been calling out for correct and safe policing. And so we are appreciative and thank the Department of Human Rights for presenting forward on this consent decree. We would like to see more things. We wish that there were more things that were added to this, and we can outline some of those. But we think that if the city is willing to be a partner in bringing forth solutions, then this is just the beginning, not the end. It is an opportunity for us to be leaning forward in a position where we can hold our law enforcement accountable. And it starts right here in the city of Minneapolis. George Floyd is just one name of thousands of people across this country who are murdered by police departments across this country because of simply who they are and because of the policing that exists today. We want that to change. It should not be that if you're a black person in the middle of broad daylight, you're more likely to be pulled over. That is everywhere. It has to stop here in Minneapolis. And it can't just be a policy on paper. It actually has to have significant teeth. And finally, I'll end with this. Accountability at the city. The city oversight efforts that have happened in the past, whether it's the civilian review or others, have absolutely failed miserably. Miserably. And this consent decree calls for accountability. That accountability has to actually mean something. There actually has to be accountability for these police officers. It calls for immediate investigations into these incidents. It also, we're asking for people to believe us, because I think there's a complete lack of trust in any system today in the city of Minneapolis. How can our community trust the system when in the past they've failed every single minute? And that is why we're calling on for a strong monitoring work group, and we'll work on developing a group that we will present forward that will bring expertise from here locally, but also nationally, to make sure that we get the best consent decree that has ever been in the United States, because we have a community that is demanding it. And we have leadership from the mayor's office and the city council that wants to make sure policing happen, as well as the police chief, who will also be supporting all of the initiatives that come out of the consent decree. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And I want to echo what Delaney talked about related to the monitor. Monitors are the secret sauce that make these agreements actually work. You can have a great agreement, but if it's not monitored well and if it's not enforced, then it means nothing. We have a lot of concerns about the way that the section on monitoring is written in this particular report. Our concerns include that it's written such that the only people who can be involved in monitoring are people with a law enforcement background, and we don't think that's correct. We think that a lot of different kinds of people bring a lot of different kinds of skills, and while it's important to have academics and some people with law enforcement knowledge and legal knowledge on this team, we think that the authentic experiences of people who have been brutalized by police and the families of people who have been killed also bring something important to the table in terms of understanding. And we think that people who have experience working on police policy and trying to get it to be enforced by the city also bring important experiences. And so we are going to propose to the judge that that section be rewritten, or that that section be reconsidered in terms of the requirements of who can be on this team, because honestly, who's on the monitoring team matters greatly. It is the secret sauce of whether or not a consent decree will actually bring about the changes that are needed to be made. And with that, I'm going to now turn this over to Loretta Van Pelt with Twin Cities Coalition for Justice for Jamar.
Hi, my name is Loretta Van Pelt, and I'll be reading a joint statement from the Twin Cities Coalition for Justice for Jamar and Minneapolis for Community Control of Police. On Friday, March 31st, the City of Minneapolis and the Minnesota Department of Human Rights announced the signing of the consent decree to address human rights violations by the Minneapolis Police Department. The agreement was negotiated entirely behind closed doors. The community had zero opportunity to even read it before it was voted on by the City Council and signed by the mayor. The MDHR conducted extensive community engagement while the city did nothing to engage the residents of Minneapolis. With no input from the community, the city negotiated the agreement entirely behind closed doors. While the agreement lays out some much-needed policy changes, ultimately the structure of the power mechanism is unchanged, with Jacob Frey as the only elected civilian with any power over the police. Frey and the Minnesota Department of Human Rights concedes the agreement is just a roadmap, but who is driving us down that road? The plan hinges on the police chief having the will to carry out changes, and at the end of the day, the police chief reports directly to the community safety commissioner, an unelected bureaucrat, and the mayor, an unaccountable elected official. Now they are asking for blind trust from a community that has borne the brunt of racist and violent policing for decades. The MDHR's investigation into the city and police department documents what Minneapolis residents already knew. Left to its own devices, the Minneapolis Police Department will avoid accountability and reparative action at all costs. How can the families and communities who lost Jamar Clark, Fong Lee, Terrence Franklin, Justin DeMond, Travis Jordan, George Floyd, Amir Locke, and countless other stolen lives trust the very institutions that inflicted decades of brutality to carry out reforms? The city and MPD have resisted these reforms for decades. Why should we trust that it will be different this time? Another fatal flaw of the process laid out by the settlement agreement is it assumes the same people who have exacerbated Minneapolis's police brutality crisis for years will suddenly have the discernment to designate appointees that will actually listen to and implement feedback from the community. Our community has been shut out and ignored in every city program or policy meant to increase police accountability. In addition, the CCPO appointees are not empowered to determine policy or enforce discipline. Instead, discipline is determined by the police chief alone. The only civilian with power over the chief is Mayor Frey, who famously campaigned on his bogus no-knock warrant ban just a few months before Amir Locke was murdered on the couch where he slept as a result of a no-knock warrant. Leaving this much power in the hands of a police chief depends on them being aware of and committed to eradicating the egregious racism, sexism, and discriminatory behavior baked into police culture. The failures of even so-called progressive chiefs like Madera Arendado in making any substantive change to the MPD's racist practices and culture is a testament to how our community can't count on MPD or city leadership to hold MPD accountable. This continues the pattern of promising change without delivering, without empowering the community members to lead accountability and reform efforts, especially those most impacted by racist police violence. We can't break free from the endless cycle of police abuse and inaction. There can be no accountability without analysis and punishment of past crimes perpetrated by officers in the MPD. The settlement makes no provisions for firing or disciplining officers based on past records of conduct and does not offer any plan to investigate cases for victim families that have alleged abuse or cover-ups. Derek Chauvin was not the only officer with dozens of undisciplined complaints and multiple civilian murders on his record, but he is one of very few who face any real consequences. Many of the most violent officers still serve on the MPD force. Not only do the families of past victims of police violence deserve acknowledgement of harm, it is also critical for the safety of community members that officers with documented records of abuse are removed from the force. This consent decree does not make the police permanently accountable. Effectively, it only puts them on probation. Someday, the consent decree will be terminated. After that, aside from the powerless CCPO, there will be no other form of permanent oversight, and therefore no assurance that the policies changes imposed on the MPD will continue to be enforced. An independent evaluator that monitors the police department and has the authority to check power of the mayor is positive, but independent oversight with decision-making power like this should be both permanent and elected. The dissent decree is not enough to meet the long-time demand by community members that MPD be held accountable for its violent racist practices. In order to have true accountability, the people of Minneapolis need to be steering the process from start to finish. We need community control of the police. The Minneapolis Civilian Police Accountability Commission, or CPAC, is a community-led grassroots historical demand to enact community control of the police, of the Minneapolis Police Department. If implemented, CPAC would be an all-elected, all-civilian body directly accountable to the people instead of a temporary period of oversight. The CPAC will be enshrined in the Minneapolis Charter. making it difficult to remove or undermine its powers. Civilians, including those who have experienced police violence, would be empowered to determine MPD policies and to enforce disciplinary measures against the officers who violate those policies and break the law. CPAC would have the power to hire and fire the police chief, set and review MPD budget, and remove officers that it finds unfit for duty. I'll read right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Loretta. I want to emphasize something that Loretta talked about, which is the process that got us here. Leading up to the consent decree being put together, many organizations, ours included, had a number of meetings with the Minnesota Department of Human Rights. We also spent 2 summers having canvassers in the community talking about the potential for consent decree, talking about the Minnesota Department of Human Rights and Department of Justice investigations into the Minneapolis Police Department and the city of Minneapolis, and gathering people's input into these potential consent decrees. And we shared that information. In fact, our organization gathered over 2,300 experiences that people shared with us about things that happened to them at the hands of the Minneapolis Police Department. We shared those both with the Department of Justice and with the Minnesota Department of Human Rights in order to inform their investigations. So we're, well satisfied with the interactions we've had with the Minnesota Department of Human Rights. We are far less satisfied with the city, however. Particularly because the city elected on Friday, after an all-day closed meeting on last Thursday, they elected on Friday to vote on the agreement without the community ever even seeing it. That is a violation of the open meeting law. Under the open meeting law, terms of settlement of a lawsuit are to be public, and at least one copy of the materials has to be available in the meeting room or nearby the meeting room in order for the public to be able to have access to it before it is voted on. The city failed to do that because they wanted to have a press conference. Our organization's representatives even went to the city clerk's office after the meeting and asked for a copy of the consent decree. We were told that we could not have a copy of it until after the mayor signed it, and we had to wait several minutes until we were finally provided a copy right before the closed press conference. This is not the way to start a consent decree. Illegal conduct is not the way to get started on a process for reforming the police. That's a problem in and of itself. And so we have great concerns about the fact that the community was not even permitted to see this thing before the city council voted on it. And again, that's illegal under the open meeting law. So we have issues with that. We are hoping to get an advisory opinion from the Office of Administration for the state of Minnesota on that exact issue. The city council should not get the idea that this is the way to do things. It cannot be. It's undemocratic, it's illegal, and it's wrong. With that, I'm going to call Tashira Garraway with Families Supporting Families Against Police Violence. Tashira?
I stand here today standing for the life, first and foremost, of Justin Tigan, who was stolen at the hands of St. Paul Police. But I also stand here today in representation of all the other people that have been killed here in the state of Minnesota. And a lot of those killings have come from the Minneapolis Police Department. It's sad that we have to have a set of rules that tells human beings how to treat other human beings. That's basically what a consent decree is. Telling human beings how to treat people that look like me, people with this skin color. It's sad because our loved ones paid the ultimate price of what this corrupted system, the Minneapolis police, the pain that they have inflicted upon our community and upon people and families. The fact that the Human Rights Department reached out to myself to help organize meeting with impacted families over and over and over again prior to the consent decree being voted on last week. The fact that it was a closed-door meeting without us is hurtful. Nothing about us without us. But it continues to happen over and over and over again. The Minneapolis police, the city council, or none of these guys can be trusted. This is why we're asking for an overview of it from people in the community. These are the people that I trust. These are the people who have fought tirelessly with our impacted families, not the people that were in that room that made decisions behind our backs. If you want transparency, if you want to say we give transparency, we give full honesty to the community, stop having these closed door meetings. Because these closed doors meetings are a violation of our trust. We don't know what's being said. We don't know what's being agreed upon until it comes out to the community, and then we're not happy with the results. But if you included us from the beginning, then we would feel that it was the truth, and we would feel that it was true transparency. So no more closed doors meeting. It is a violation to the community, a violation to our trust, and a violation to the people that you have already hurt. Again, this is why we don't trust you guys, because you constantly do things that violate our trust. So we want oversight of this whole thing. CUAPB, Racial Justice Network, CARE Minnesota, Family Supporting Families Against Police Violence, Twin Cities Justice Coalition Justice for Jamar, Black Lives Matter Minnesota, and on and on and on. We are the people that need to be overseeing this, because we are the people who are standing up and fighting for lives that have been stolen at the hands of the Minneapolis police and many departments around this state. Thank you.
I'm so glad Tashir talked about transparency, because again, we have been very pleased with the level of transparency with the Minnesota Department of Human Rights, but not with the city of Minneapolis. They've been very problematic in terms of wanting to actually connect with the community, and that's been a huge issue. Throughout this process, they never once stepped out to ask the community what we wanted. With that, I'm going to bring up here Mayan Burrell, who is a victim of police misconduct. He spent years in prison over Minneapolis police misconduct and Minneapolis police lies that put an innocent man behind bars. Mayan?
It's speaking about transparency. And right now we're speaking about policies. We're speaking about policies that be put in play in order to make sure that everything goes correctly. But these are things that you shouldn't need, you know what I mean? I'm coming out to speak out about the humanity and everything, you feel me? Like, whenever you have people that are in positions of authority, they don't care about the people that they're policing or the people that's underneath them, you're gonna always have corruption that take place, and you're always gonna have victims. So I'm coming out and speaking on behalf of all the people that have been victimized, the people that had things taken away from them with no accountability. So we speak about policing, and we speak about things that are exposed, but there's so many things that are exposed that are right now that come out into the public where people are able to see the injustice that took place in our system, but there's been no correction, there's been no accountability. And that's intentionally, I wholeheartedly believe that that's intentional. And so with those closed door meetings and you not understanding what's actually going on behind them doors, this is how these things come to be, because you have people that are being overseen by their allies, people that don't necessarily have the people who are being affected by the injustices' best interests at heart. So many times we see injustices being swept under the rug, and in reality, when it comes down to policing and police officers, when you come into the courtroom, it's almost as if everything that they say or that they do is never going to be any flaws, almost as if it's impossible to be flawed because of the people that are being in positions to hold these people accountable don't really might not necessarily want to jeopardize their relationships or their friendship with the individual that are these individuals that are imposing their wrath on or have become tyrants and are oppressing the people at the bottom. So we need these policies. We need the people that are being affected by these injustices and that are actually being harmed, being hurt, and being victimized. We need these people to be a part of the process, so they can not only to where they can receive justice, to where they can have a reinstated faith in the system. The people that I know are hopeless when it comes to policing, because they never actually seen policing work here in the state of Minnesota, especially in Hennepin County. These systems are functioning exactly the way that they were created to function. And with that, we talk about fixing a broke system, but in reality, there's no way to fix something that's functioning the way that it was created to function. We have to create a new. And so with these policies and us being involved in the process, we're creating something new because it's never been done before. But it seems like we continuously have doors shut in our face because the powers that be have control over who's allowed to actually even see the process take place. So we're coming out today to ask to be a part of this process, and for us to actually be able to come and help the people that don't have anyone to speak out about the injustices that are taking place in our community. And with that, I want to hand it.
Thank you, Maayan, and I'm so glad that Maayan was able to speak because he is a victim of corrupt Minneapolis policing, of racist Minneapolis policing, the exact kind of policing that Minnesota Department of Human Rights is designed to address. It's so important that people like Maayan be at the table because they are the actual victims, as well as, families of, impacted families by police violence. It's so important that these folks are at the table, and it's ludicrous that they would be left off the table. And so it's very important that the people who feel this impact from long-term racist policing really have something to say about this, and I'm so really pleased that he was able to be here and talk about this. And with that, I'm very eager to introduce you to our own Nakima Levy-Armstrong with Racial Justice Network. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you all for being here. I stand in solidarity with everyone who has spoken today and those who could not be here, who have long-standing concerns about the conduct of the Minneapolis Police Department. I also want to remind the general public that were it not for the people standing around and beside me, and the people who've been in the streets, the people who have used their voices after losing loved ones at the hands of the Minneapolis Police Department, we wouldn't even be in this position to have a consent decree. The general public and elected officials from one administration to the next knew about the violent, abusive, and toxic conduct and culture of the Minneapolis Police Department, and they did nothing but rubber stamp that behavior. That is a travesty of justice. It is unconscionable. And it is a part of why we are here today. The consent decree is long overdue, yet it is not a magic bullet to address the long-standing problems with the Minneapolis Police Department. One issue, as was mentioned earlier, that is not covered by the consent decree is the fact that there are police officers still on the force within the Minneapolis Police Department who have a history of abusive conduct, excessive force, and violating people's civil rights and human rights. The mayor of Minneapolis, along with the city council, should have and still can conduct a probe of those particular officers who have been named as individuals who participated in the use of deadly force or excessive force, and set different standards by removing them from the Minneapolis Police Department. As you have just seen, in recent days, and it has come out in the news, that 11 of us filed class action lawsuits against the city of Minneapolis for the use of excessive force levied against us after George Floyd was killed. I was one of those plaintiffs. And in addition to demanding changes in terms of the way that protesters are being treated when we take to the streets, one other demand that we had was with regard to Bob Kroll, the former Minneapolis Police Federation head and a former Minneapolis police officer. Bob Kroll is an example of everything that is wrong with the Minneapolis Police Department. And it's sad that it took protesters going to his house and standing up for justice, along with the lawsuit, for him to be banned from being a law enforcement officer in Hennepin County, Ramsey County, and Anoka County, when the reality is that this should be a statewide ban. Someone like Bob Kroll should not be allowed to be in law enforcement, to be in a leadership position, or to be at the Capitol lobbying for law enforcement, which is my understanding of part of what is happening now. But how many other Bob Krolls are still being left on the force, still being given power over the most vulnerable people in our city, and comfortably collecting a paycheck, benefits, and will receive a pension at the end of the day? That's completely unacceptable. So we are calling upon city leadership to go beyond this consent decree and to clean house and to do the right thing by the people of the city of Minneapolis, but particularly those who are most vulnerable, those who experienced abuse and silence, those who were ignored, those who were treated as if their concerns and the abuse that they experienced did not matter. As a result of this consent decree and the evidence that has come forward through the Minnesota Department of Human Rights over a year-long investigation into the Minneapolis Police Department, there should be sufficient enough evidence for Mayor Jacob Fry and the Minneapolis City Council to make the decision to set up a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, similar to what we saw in South Africa, so that we can go through the process of bringing forward reparations to those who have been victimized by the Minneapolis Police Department. That pain, that trauma, that abuse that people experience, along with an empty seat at their dinner table for every holiday because their loved one was brutally murdered, is not going to go away simply because there is a consent decree. Those families deserve reparations. They deserve compensation. There are still people behind bars who were victimized by the Minneapolis Police Department and their corruption, who falsified evidence and information as part of their investigations, and people did not have adequate legal counsel, and they wound up behind bars. You just heard from Mayan Burrell, who was victimized as a teenager by the Minneapolis Police Department, who was railroaded, who had all the forces of the system against him to steal away 18 years of his life and counting. It's completely unacceptable. So we have to be reminded that we didn't just get here because a government agency decided to look into the police department. We're here because of the blood that has been shed, the tears that have been cried, and the battles that have been fought. So change is partially here, but the story is not over. There is much more work to be done. And as this group has said, we expect to have a seat at the table because we were forced to create the damn table.
That's right.
While everyone else was going about his business as usual, we saw injustices and we refused to cast a blind eye. That's how we got here. So we are expecting everyone who has their hand in this consent decree to listen to the people who stood up and fought, and whose lives are not going to miraculously change because of a 144-page document, but who deserve to have the power to genuinely change the culture of the Minneapolis Police Department, to genuinely remove those who do not deserve to collect a paycheck or have authority over vulnerable communities. We refuse to sit silently by as this process unfolds. We will continue to make our voices heard, and we will not rest until genuine change comes. Thank you.
Yeah. I'm going to let you all know that we have a community forum that's going to be happening on April 28th, Friday, April 28th at 6 p.m. at 4200 Cedar to answer the community's questions about this consent decree and to help prepare the community, because the next step is what's called a fairness hearing. We're going to be petitioning the judge to hold a fairness hearing, which allows the community to have a voice in this consent decree since the city didn't bring any of us to the table. This will allow the community to say what we think needs needs to be in this consent decree and where the areas of weaknesses are in the consent decree, and include additional, requirements against the city. And so that's going to be the next important steps here. Getting a fairness hearing, appearing at that fairness hearing, and again, this community forum on April 28th to notify the community and keep them informed. And so those are going to be the next steps. We are all doing a deep dive into this consent decree. We want to understand it intimately so that we know what the flaws are, what the weaknesses are, and what the very good things are in this consent decree, because there are some good things in here, but there are some areas that need to be stronger as well. And so those are things that we are working on as a community at this point. And to reiterate what Nikema and others have talked about, we must ensure that the community is the group of people who are monitoring this. We cannot have some Jones Day type outfit or some other out-of-town people who fly in, have, confabs with the city, pat them on the head and say, nice job, and then fly on out of here again. We're not going to have that. That's what's happened in other cities. And we've met with organizers in cities all over the country about their consent decrees. And again and again and again, what we were told is that it's all about the monitors. And for us, we are going to ensure that we have a proper monitoring process that involves and centers the community. So that's our goals. Thank you for being here. Any questions?
Michelle, it's a foregone conclusion that the feds are going to probably issue their own consent decree. What are you all doing to get a seat at that table here? Will you have a seat at that table, and what kind of community input are you going to have?
Absolutely. We have met extensively with representatives of the Department of Justice throughout this entire process. We have regular meetings with them every few months, and in fact, we hosted them when they came in at the beginning of the year to address specifically the issue of Minneapolis police interactions with people experiencing mental health crises. We brought people to the table who had had difficulties as a result of Minneapolis and the way that they deal with people experiencing mental health crisis. We brought forward a complaint, a specific and formal complaint against the Minneapolis police, and we brought forward, and that complaint was packed with evidence, with 160 pages roughly of evidence. And so we have been deeply engaged with this process from the beginning. And as I said before, we also brought forward 2,300 experiences of people with Minneapolis police that was shared with the DOJ in order to inform their investigation. So yes, we are deeply involved in that as well. And what I think people need to understand is that there's a difference between these two consent decrees. The Minneapolis Department of Human Rights can only enforce those statutes that are, or those provisions that are part of the state statute, the Human Rights Statute. The U.S. Department of Justice can address a whole panoply of things that are not included in the Minnesota Department of Human Rights, the Human Rights Statute. And so, for example, one of the things that we raised to the DOJ that they didn't think about when they first got here is we asked them to take a deep dive into the investigation of the killings and community violence against people of color. We were working with over a dozen families whose loved ones had been murdered in community violence and for whom the Minneapolis police failed to engage in a meaningful investigation, thus denying those people services. And so we raised that as an issue to the DOJ, and the quality of investigations in Minneapolis is a subject that they can absolutely address. And so that was something we asked them to do, and we asked, and they met with many, many families of people who did not get a proper investigation into their loved one's death or violent crime against a loved one. And so those are things that the Minnesota Department of Human Rights can't really address, but the DOJ can.
My last two questions here. There's obviously new rules around traffic stops and minor violations. Just want to get your reaction on that here, and also the reaction to the restrictions on searching people for marijuana.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear the last question.
I'm sorry. Basically, react to the new rules around traffic stops and minor violations here that are included in this here. Also want to know what your reaction is on searching folks for possession of marijuana.
I will tell you that Communities United Against Police Brutality likes that section of the consent decree very much, that section on stops and searches. We think there's a couple of minor weaknesses in it that we're going to make recommendations on through the fairness hearing process, but largely we like that, and we particularly like the fact that Minneapolis police are no longer able to make a pretextual stop based on supposedly smelling marijuana. We think that that's a very important constricture on their their ability to expand a normal traffic stop into something much bigger. But I'd like to ask the other representatives here their feelings about it. Yeah, come on up.
So just in answer to your question, I too am pleased by those sections of the consent decree, but as Michelle talked about earlier, a lot of the portions of what's in the consent decree were things that the community had actually previously proposed. And so even when you look at the equipment violation traffic stops, the Racial Justice Network approached Chief Madera Arredondo years ago about racial disparities with equipment violation traffic stops after learning about the issue from then Chief Public Defender Mary Moriarty, who saw lots of disparities in her office in terms of how Black people were being disproportionately pulled over for things like a broken taillight or a broken mirror. But police were going beyond that. They were issuing citations to people, and they were also more likely to search vehicles driven by Black people. And so we approached Chief Arredondo and his staff, and we worked with them for about a year looking over the evidence. We actually demanded a complete moratorium, which is a ban on pulling people over for equipment violation traffic stops. What came out of that process was the chief not agreeing to a moratorium, but agreeing that police would no longer issue citations, but that they would issue fix-it coupons. So that is a practice that has been in place now for the last few years, and it is now memorialized through that consent decree because that should become a permanent part of the departmental policy. With regard to the provision against pulling people over simply for the smell of marijuana, of course, we all know that that's long overdue. As a matter of fact, back in 2014, the ACLU conducted a study called Picking Up the Pieces, where they actually talked about the disparities with regard to marijuana enforcement in the city of Minneapolis, specifically with regard to Black folks and Native folks who were being disproportionately pulled over, stopped, and cited for the smell of marijuana coming out of their vehicles. We know that the state is likely headed towards marijuana legalization, which is a part of why I think that provision ended up in the consent decree. I personally support the legalization of marijuana. I also support, again, reparations for those who have previously been charged and cited for the smell of marijuana coming out of their vehicles, and again, who are now in the system, who are facing collateral consequences or who have a mark on their records that may have prevented them from getting jobs or affordable housing. That is precisely where reparations and mass expungements come in, and that needs to be a part of this process.
Absolutely.
I'll just add, I think the one piece of this consent decree that we would like to see it be even stronger, and I think it alludes to it, is one, the consent decree talks about failed leadership at the city's police department, but also failed in actually doing investigations when citizens actually report excessive use of force. And we believe right now, if anyone in Minneapolis has an interaction with the Minneapolis Police Department, and excessive force is actually taking place, that we believe that that individual, outside of being, hopefully not killed, that person is more than likely not to see any form of accountability. It's being buried and it's not being taken seriously. And it takes a longer time for even those, and we know in our communities, many people are even afraid to report on police, knowing how they interact with you after, and the fears of retaliation. So we see great things on this consent decree, but unless they're implemented, it is nothing worth than the $144 or 144 page, whatever, how many pennies it costs to make that paper. It has to be implemented. It has to be taken seriously. We as a community will not back down. We're going to stay the course, and we are also going to show up to the table as a monitoring group in hope of partnering as a monitoring group. But I would say that if there's no accountability for anybody who's currently violated, their rights are violated, and we don't make that change immediately from the mayor and the police chief showing us what that actually looks like moving forward after this consent decree, then I personally believe that nothing has fundamentally changed, and we have to take the actual violence and the actual targeting of our people. Finally, I will speak to this, and I know we didn't talk about this, is we all know that we are targeted by the Minneapolis Police Department. Our social media, our accounts, our organizations, we know that. It's not new. It's not something that the report had to tell us. We put and sacrifice our ability to say the truth, and we will continue to do that. And unless the leadership of the city, and specifically the new chief, takes serious approach in the behavior of police departments targeting activists, but we know that for a long history, activists who continue to project the right message of unity and public safety have been targeted, and we're no different. And historically, we know agencies will use all of their power to try to silence us or to divide the community, but we will be strong, united, and make sure that not only this consent decree, but the second consent decree and any other effort moves forward as collective.
All right, thank you. That's right. Any further questions?
Yes, thank you all for this. 26 years ago, we were in the same spot. The feds were here, consent decree, 5-6 years. What happens differently on this time?
Well, actually, that wasn't a consent decree. That was something a little bit different. That was a mediation with the Department of Justice Mediation Services, and mediations are voluntary. The city, I was part of the initial mediation team that was elected by the community to serve the community on that team, and the city refused to meet with the mediation team that was actually elected by the community. And so when they said, we're going to make sure that you have to have the people that we want on that team, a bunch of us walked away. And what came out of that mediation was nothing better than police have to give you a business card if you ask for it, but try asking for it in the community and find out what kind of a beatdown you get when you do. So that process was a useless process that wasted 5 years of people's time. Meanwhile, more and more people were getting injured and killed by excessive force and police murders, and nothing good, frankly, as far as I'm concerned, came out of that process. This had better be a whole lot different. A whole lot different. You know, and to speak to the point that Jaylani raised, nothing in this consent decree actually addresses the targeting of activists, and we've been very unhappy about that part. We raised that to Rebecca Lucero with the Department of Human Rights. Apparently they could not come to any kind of agreement with the city, and it was prolonging the ability to finalize the agreement, and so that's why they kind of let it slide. But the DOJ has said that they will address this, and we're going to ensure that they do, because it cannot be okay for the city and the Minneapolis Police Department to spy on people who have broken no laws, who are simply trying to make change. It cannot be okay for them to target us and to spy on us. It's ridiculous. You know, why are police wasting those resources spying on people who have broken no laws? That's outlandish, and we're going to address that and make sure that that is addressed by the DOJ.
Another quick question. Last week during the press conference, they didn't give a total tally. They didn't know how much money this is going to cost. What is the community, what is your all's response into now we're looking at funneling tens of millions more dollars into the Minneapolis police with this new agreement?
I think other people will want to address that, but I will say this. We have already spent in the last 3 years $111 million on judgments, settlements, and phony PTSD claims. We have already spent that money. However much money this thing will cost to enforce can't hold a candle to that. So I think it's money well spent, and especially if it prevents harm for other people, because that's incalculable. So other people want to answer that question? Tashira?
I agree with Michelle. Whatever it takes, however much it costs for them to work on this, I think that is very necessary. We lost loved ones. To listen to mothers like Amir Locke break down on the phone, you think that we care about a dollar. It could never, ever amount to what they've stolen from us. I can't even really put this into words, but whatever amount that it takes to work on this, it needs to be spent, because like Michelle said, it's been millions of dollars spent for them to their blood money that they give our families to try to make us be quiet and go away, to try to silence us, all of that. And so these people need to get it right. These people all they care about is their money. All they care about is their buildings. They don't care about the pain that they've inflicted. They don't care about anything but their money. So spend it. Do what you got to do to make it right. And you still won't all the way make it right because we still don't have our loved ones. Thank you.
Are there any further questions? Thank you all very much for being here this afternoon. We appreciate it. Just know that this will be an ongoing story. We will continue to keep you informed. We do expect the community to be at the table. As Nikema rightly pointed out, we made the table, and we're not about to go away from it. So, we'll continue to keep you in the loop, and thank you all again so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great job, everybody. I love that point you made to say. We did. It's sad, but it's true.
You know,
We got to come to the table because we made the damn table. We made the damn table.
but they're moving in ways like
Sneakily.
Friday night, last day of the week, try to just get rid of it, go away.
Give the city council like 24 hours to review. Thank you for being such an expensive document. And then they keep saying, trust us, trust us, trust us. No. To do what? That? They don't deserve our trust.
They're rotten to the core and they want to stay the course.
Thank you all for joining. This is Nico from Unicorvite. Thank you, Dan, for running the back end. We are here live in City Hall, where police accountability movement leaders just gave a press conference. Find out more at unicorvite.ninja.
What's that?
I know they're just going to be starting a massive search to we had the shower go up.
I just, but I don't know. I only looked close enough into what was going on with your
Yeah. I got my engine in the response.
That's me too. I got a call. Or no, I got a call. I was talking to somebody yesterday. In just this. Press if I want to stay late.